Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome to this special Sunday edition of China Update, a program where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. First up, we need to talk about the ongoing dangerous tensions in the South China Sea between US ally, the Philippines, and the People's Republic of China. On Friday, there was another Philippines resupply mission of the Sierra Madre on Second Thomas Shoal. The Second Thomas Shoal, of course, lies within the UN-sanctioned Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone, but is claimed by China and surrounded by its flotilla. Beijing claims this area as its undisputed territory. During the 4-hour face-off on Friday, dozens of Chinese Coast Guard and accompanying ships chased and encircled Philippine vessels, which were delivering food and other supplies to Filipino forces on the marooned Sierra Madre, the Philippines' fragile territorial outpost. It's reported that the Philippines was able to deliver the supplies to the handful of Marines stationed on the rusting ship. The true test, however, will come when the Philippines needs to deliver construction materials to reinforce the ship before it falls apart. A US Navy surveillance plane flew in circles observing the action throughout the afternoon on Friday. According to the Philippines Coast Guard, at least 38 Chinese ships were spotted in the area, including a Chinese naval fast assault craft and a hospital ship. China is waiting for the marooned ship to fall apart so it can swoop in and take possession. Why doesn't it just do this now? Well, though marooned and rusting, the warship is still actively commissioned, meaning an armed attack on it would constitute an act of war, triggering the defense treaty obligations of the United States. This is why China has been working so hard to prevent resupplies to the grounded ship, increasing tensions and the risk of an accident in the region. Earlier this week, US-based Wall Street Journal published a piece called Surge and Swarm: How China's Ships Control the South China Sea, describing how one of these incidents normally goes down. Quote, at least 15 Chinese ships took up positions near Second Thomas Shoal on October 22nd. As the convoy from the Philippines approached, the Chinese ships burst into a flurry of maneuvers, darting around, circling, cutting across bows. They outnumbered the Philippine ships 4-1. The first collision occurred 6 nautical miles from the reef's mouth. A Chinese Coast Guard ship hit one of the Philippine boats carrying supplies for the outpost, prompting it to abort its mission. 2 hours later, a Chinese militia boat bumped a Philippine Coast Guard ship. The events that day were part of a playbook for China, which uses its overwhelming numbers and outposts in the South China Sea to pressure rivals. On short notice, Beijing's fleets can move rapidly, even hundreds of miles from its own shores, to swarm and obstruct opposing ships. A decade ago, Mischief Reef was nothing more than a smattering of land, peaking above the water at low tide. China first built it into an island, then a military base equipped with missiles, radar, and a runway. End quote. Now, there is a wider geopolitical aspect at work too. Hal Brands, Henry A. Kissinger Distinguished Professor of Global Affairs at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, argues that China probably does not want a full-on collision, but that this isolated reef offers Beijing leverage worth exploiting. Quote, because every crisis highlights the seeming absurdity of America's pledge to defend a decaying rust bucket. So every crisis focuses Manila and US allies throughout the region on the question of how credible those security guarantees really are. End quote. UK-based The Economist made a similar argument this week too. In a piece titled, A Chinese Dispute with the Philippines is a Test of America, the outlet writes, quote, the South China Sea is a dangerous and revealing place just now. Both China and America have every reason to avoid conflict there. But China yearns to expose America as an unreliable ally and to make the Philippines obey Chinese drawn red lines, or pay a visible price. To keep the peace, rules will be less help than calculations of relative power and national interests. End quote. While this is very much a dangerous game to play, it isn't without its merits. If Beijing can undermine the reliability of the US as an ally in the South China Sea over some rocks in the ocean, then this could undermine confidence not only in Manila, but also in more important theatres with Tokyo, Seoul, Canberra, and of course, Taipei. This week at the Indo-Pacific 2023 conference, the nominee to lead US Indo-Pacific Command, Samuel Paparo, said that he believes that Beijing has directed the military to be more provocative in encounters in the East and South China Seas, expressing to press at the event, quote, "They are increasingly provocative and it's deeply concerning. At times they have hazarded themselves and they have hazarded the people that are in the vessels and aircraft they are interacting with." End quote. Asked if the Chinese pilots and ship captains were acting on their own or not, he said, quote, "I believe they've been directed to be more aggressive and they have followed these orders." End quote. Adding, quote, "China wants to create tense, uncomfortable situations in the hope that the US and partner forces will vacate the space that every force has the right to be in." End quote. So far, Washington has stood by its ally and its obligations under the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty with the Philippines. The US State Department reacted to Friday's confrontation by renewing its warning that it is obligated to defend the Philippines if Filipino forces, public vessels, or aircraft, including those of Coast Guard vessels, quote, "face an armed attack anywhere in the South China Sea," end quote. Adding, quote, "The PRC's actions are inconsistent with international law and follow a pattern of dangerous operational behavior in the South China Sea." End quote. For its part, a spokesperson for China's Coast Guard said that it, quote, "followed the Philippine ships in accordance with the law." End quote. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson also condemned the actions of the Philippines. This week, of course, has seen several state media articles about the regional tensions from the Chinese side. The director of the Center for Philippine Studies at Jinan University, Guangdong Province, published an opinion piece in state media this week warning Manila to, quote, "not tangle itself in major power rivalry." End quote. Writing, quote, "Why should the Philippines wantonly magnify the South China Sea dispute or even gradually cut itself off from China? For a country like the Philippines actively intervening in the competition among great powers and intensifying the security conflicts with a major power while disregarding the needs of domestic economic development is no different from throwing itself onto the fire." End quote. State-run The Global Times also framed the situation as one exacerbated by the United States, rather than a local problem of real concern to the Philippines. Writing on Thursday, quote, "The current tense situation on the reef has largely been caused by the overt or covert intervention of the United States." End quote. The president of the National Institute for South China Sea Studies is then cited as expressing, quote, "The US is without doubt the biggest negative element that is affecting the peaceful and stable situation of the South China Sea." End quote. As we have observed with previous incidents around the Second Thomas Shoal, Japan, which relies heavily on a stable South China Sea because of the imports and exports that flow through that region, is another external major power concerned with the current state of affairs. On Saturday, Japan's Navy announced the start of a joint annual military exercise with the Philippines, observing the operations for the first time as the two countries seek closer maritime cooperation which was announced last week. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force Vice Admiral Akira Saito told reporters, quote, "The Philippines is a very important country for us and we are looking to coordinate with their Navy at every possible opportunity." End quote. Next up, for this special Sunday episode, we have two brief economic updates we need to cover. If you're getting some value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button, share this with someone who you think would enjoy it, is also a big help, and Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below for anyone who can go the extra mile and help keep the channel financially sustainable, free and open to all, 6 days, and in today's case, 7 days a week. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Okay, we need to cover two economy-related updates before we move into next week. First, the China International Import Expo has concluded. The preliminary numbers look rather good. According to the CIIE Bureau, a unit of the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, the value of deals at the Chinese International Import Expo hit an all-time high, with deals worth $78.4 billion signed, an increase of 6.7% year on year. Of course, this is from a low base. The China International Import Expo is the world's largest import trade fair. It ended on Friday after a week of operations in Shanghai. The event attracted 3,400 exhibitions, including the likes of Siemens and Tesla, and nearly 400,000 accredited visitors. The number of participants and the exhibition area was 367,000 square meters, which are both all-time highs. While these are official numbers, they are relatively reliable because they can be verified by examining the other sides of many of these deals, which are with players outside the country. According to the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, for example, the American Food and Agricultural Pavilion saw over $500 million worth of deals signed. Speaking to Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post, Chamber President Eric Zheng expressed, quote, "The results of the American Food and Agricultural Pavilion exceeded our expectations. The CIIE has proved to be an important platform to showcase American products and services. AmCham Shanghai will continue to support American companies in growing their business in China by leveraging this unrivaled import expo." End quote. I know that there have been some reports that this expo did not do very well, but the initial numbers at least, as well as statements from foreign players on the ground, like at the American Chamber of Commerce, suggest that it wasn't too bad. And while this is only one data point, it is a positive one at a time when China's economic outlook can take all the positive news it can get. Next up, however, and finally for today's episode, we do not have positive news. Massive property developer, and at one point China's largest by sales, Country Garden, with many apartments still to be finished, has posted its biggest sales drop in at least 6 years, further straining its acute liquidity situation. Its corporate filings show that contracted sales for October plunged an incredible 81.1% from the same period a year earlier, passing an 80.7% drop in September. Month on month, sales edged up only 2.2%. US-based Bloomberg writes that Country Garden, with property developments in almost every province in China, has had a slump in transactions since warning in August of major uncertainties about redemption of its bonds. Sales are hovering around a sixth of the average monthly level in 2021 and 2022, underscoring customers' reluctance to buy. Bloomberg Intelligence property analyst Kirsty Hung writes, quote, "The developer's default on a dollar bond in late October threatens to repel home buyers and hasten the free fall of its new home transactions." End quote. We remember earlier this week we saw speculation that China's State Council told the government of Guangdong province to ask Ping An Insurance Group Co. to take a controlling stake in the developer. Essentially a massive bailout of a sick company by a relatively healthy and cash-rich one. A collapse in Country Garden, with more than 3,000 housing projects involving hundreds of thousands of units underway, could be much more consequential and damaging not only to the property sector but to the wider economy than the original Evergrande collapse. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Sunday, have a restful weekend, and I will see you all tomorrow.